Our very broad goal for our next panel is to discuss the 21st century corporation, business in the 21st century, and I'd like to welcome to the stage two leaders of very distinguished companies and very distinguished people, Brian Krzanich, the CEO of Intel, and Bernard Tyson, the CEO of Kaiser Permanente. Welcome. Welcome, Brian. Welcome, Bernard. I want to start on the subject of people. We've been discussing all day today a lot about companies and their people who work for them. And Bernard, I want to start with you to ask you to share your thoughts about, as a CEO, as a leader, you're both leaders of large organizations, which I think is instructive. You have a lot of employees. And talk about how you, as a CEO, approach managing people. You think about people for the 21st century, how you think about diversity and inclusiveness, and so on.
I guess I would start with, we have over 200,000 employees at Kaiser Permanente. And
that's a lot.
Yeah, it's quite a few. And then within our Permanente medical groups, which are independent medical groups, who contracts exclusively with Kaiser Permanente, we have 24,000 physicians in those groups. So I think a lot about, as we now are leveraging things like technology, social media, and knowledge-based workers, knowledge-based employees, how do you get the best out of those individuals? There's no question that with technology being used more and more in organizations like Kaiser Permanente, it is changing what work means for those individuals. And so I think a lot about how do I make sure that I'm not sending the wrong message, that is that there's a strategy here that technology is going to replace all your jobs, versus, at least for healthcare, it is still a high-touch area when needed, and human touch is critically important to the whole healing process. And so as we think about the future workforce, what's going to be included in that workforce? And that's on my mind quite a bit. I think the second piece is hierarchies for me don't work anymore in the 21st century, because we have capabilities of talking to our frontline in very different ways. And that's where the knowledge is, that's where the high touch is, that's where the interaction happens. And the ability to continue to gather information from this population, feed information to this population, and create an iterative process of learning makes the organization better.
Would you say, you spoke eloquently at lunch, but would you say a few more words about, you spoke about yourself and your career at lunch. Talk about, as a leader, how you approach diversity and inclusiveness, if you would.
Well, I touched on this insight about understanding the nuances. At the end of the day, all of us want our individuals to bring their whole self into the organization. To know that I can simply wake up in the morning and I am about making a positive contribution, and I am going to go into a work environment and I get full reign in doing that within the parameters that's been established. And so how do we make sure that we create an environment that is going to respect, that I may think slightly differently from you, but not to be seen as an outlier? And to respect that you may think differently from me, and I have an understanding of how you're going to relate to me. At Kaiser Permanente, I have 3 duties that I permeate across the organization. The duty of the freedom of speech. So you have the right to say anything that's on your mind, and you have to deal with the consequences of that. But also that comes with the duty to listen. So that's the first duty. The second duty is, the first duty is the duty to speak. The second duty is the duty to listen. And then the third duty is, when we say we're going north, everybody lines up to go north. So in the freedom of speech environment, you also need clear decision making, so you know when the debate is over and then we're executing into action.
You should feel free to dodge this question, but we realized backstage we are three Bay Area people who flew out to New York to be here, and you just so Bernard. I mean, anyone who is alive is aware of this, but especially Bay Area people of what happened at Google a month ago, where an engineer was fired for, some believe, for exercising his free speech. Do you agree with Google's decision to terminate that engineer, given what you just said?
No, remember, I qualified. The duty of
and
freedom
live with
of
the
speech,
consequences.
and live with the consequences. I don't know the insides and outs,
That's
so
fair, yeah.
honestly can't judge it. I will tell you, I have some similar issues at times where, with the freedom of speech, it comes with certain people who might cross the line and/or raise issues that are inappropriate, and those have to be addressed. But in terms of the specific action that Google talked about, I have enough issues in my backyard. I don't want to assess.
Totally fair.
I'm staying in my lane.
Yeah, I understand. Well said. Well, very, very well said. Brian, I want to stay on the. You're wondering what? Okay, what? Where's this going? Right? No, Intel has had some very specific numbers and statements around diversity recently. Would you share that with everyone? Talk about the company's goals, and particularly interested in the fact that you've moved those goals up.
Sure. So, we took the kind of typical Intel approach. We're a company of engineers and innovators, and we really thought about how could we best approach the problem of diversity and inclusion, and we really approached it in a kind of traditional Intel way. And we said, look, the first thing we need to do is we need to go gather all the data we can. We've been publishing, for example, our pay parity for over 10 years from a gender perspective. We now also publish twice a year our data on pay parity against ethnicity. So African American, Hispanic, all of that's published now. But yes, roughly almost 2 years ago, we came out and said that we would meet full representation at every portion of the organization by 2020.
Full representation means consistent with the general population?
No, it says the government publishes this data. This is how the whole program of are you in compliance, it publishes data about the availability. So we said we'd meet absolute availability by 2020. We just announced just a couple of weeks ago that we would hit that by roughly the middle of 2018 instead. So we've been able to pull it in a little over a year and a half. And we've taken this as a combination of, I'll call it traditional engineering, where we just go gather the data and we understand how to, where are the gaps and who do we need to hire and who do we need to grow and promote, and how do you go do this? We've also done it as, I'll call it a human engineering of what are the systems, because the first thing we learned is that there's actually a pretty good supply of people. If you know where to go and you go where those people are, it's keeping them in the company and getting them to continue to grow and develop and stay with you. So we kind of have a saying that the pipe coming into the building is big enough, it leaks once it gets in the building. And we've been fixing the leaks and understanding what in our culture really is driving people to move on.
And can you share a little bit about what you've learned? And one thing I'm interested in, Intel has this famous culture of, you call it constructive
confrontation.
Confrontation, which I assume it would be fair to say that when Andy Grove and Bob Noyce and others instituted this several decades ago, it was a very male-dominated culture. Is, for number one, true, and number two, do you need to adapt that in a 21st century corporation?
It doesn't work the way it did with Andy Grove. I grew up with Andy Grove, and slamming your fist on the table and telling you, you're just not thinking right.
That was the polite way he said it, right?
Yes, he used many different words. I know we're on TV, so I was making sure it was clean enough for TV. In today's world, what we've transitioned that to, and it's similar to it sounds like going on at Kaiser, is that we want people to speak their mind. We've got to get the ideas out. If you're going to really go and invent the future and then build it, you've got to get all the ideas on the table, and you've got to get everybody to speak their thoughts and their minds. So we talk about that, and then, but how do we do that in a way that allows people to feel respected and listened to? And so the three rules that were just mentioned are very similar, I think, to the way we think about constructive confrontation now. Speak your mind, listen, but then we call it disagree and commit.
Yeah.
You can disagree, but once we decide, you got to commit.
Yeah.
But is there a, I don't know if you articulate this or if it's happened subtly or perhaps it hasn't happened. Do you need to disagree a little bit more politely in 2017 than perhaps in 1994? You know,
Yeah.
because this is when Andy Grove was at his pounding the table best, right?
So the good thing is we're still engineers. So I think it depends on what the topic is. If it's around the culture and if it's around what's going on in the company, I think, yes, I don't know if you have to, it's whether you have to be more polite, but you absolutely have to listen better. I don't think people listened as well. But when it's a technical issue around something, what's the future of AI? Is it, this architecture or that architecture? The engineers, I want them to still come in it with data and real, intensity so that we get to the right answer and we get to the deep technical discussions.
Bernard, if we agree that the 21st century corporation is more sensitive than the 20th century corporation, I know one of the issues that you're passionate about is mental health, and I've heard you talk about it. Could you briefly share your thoughts on this with the room?
Well, both inside the organization and in society at large, people are dealing with stress in different ways today that are much more intense than ever before. And we've been on this journey, and we're still on this journey where mental health is something that we haven't really come to terms with in our society. How to deal with it, how to address it, how to treat it. If you look at the way we've treated from a medical standpoint, we have detached the head from the body. And so you stop and think about mental health is handled over there. Mental health has all the negative stigma that goes along with it. And yet most of us within ourselves, our families, or in our immediate circles, we all have examples of individuals suffering from anything from mild depression to, much more severe illnesses. I think inside of our workforce, we've had this historical context that would suggest that people are to leave their problems outside and then come to work. Mm-hmm. And the reality is people have always brought those problems inside, and I think it's intensified today by the additional stress and the 24/7 linkage to information that is just coming our way. I mean, I'm thinking today, just think about how our environment just might be feeling today from this weekend. Right? A combination of the questions of race and the American flag and should you kneel or not. Then you add on top of that North Korea. And, how would we respond to a bomb being, landed in the United States or anywhere in the world of epic proportion that would wipe out potentially millions of people? Well, you kind of log that in the back of your mind, and the mind has to process that, either as rational or irrational. And those are things that we all ought to be thinking about in terms of the pressure points that our people are under as they are carrying out the mission of our respective organizations.
This will seem like a strange segue, but I don't think it is, which is that we're living in scary times, Brian, and one of the things that some people are scared about is artificial intelligence and the machines. And there's basically two memes. One meme is that the machines are gonna dominate us. We're finished as the human race. And the other meme is, no, we designed them and we can keep control. This is of interest to you personally and professionally, I think.
Yeah, I think the good that artificial intelligence can bring to our society is just unbounded almost. And I liken it back to the invention of the combustion engine or any of the beginning of the industrial age. there was always fear out there before each one of these big transitions that happened in society. You know, the world was going to end, you know, people were going to be put out of work in droves, but actually what happened is whole new industries that we didn't even understand would become available or that would exist in the future really actually employed many, many more people of all skill sets. And artificial intelligence is going to do that same thing. It's going to bring so much opportunity. You know, if we just take healthcare, and I was reading an article this weekend where, you know, through artificial intelligence, working with the doctor to interpret MRIs, they can detect Alzheimer's up to 10 years earlier than the human can. Giving that capability to a doctor and being able to bring the technology to the patients is going to dramatically improve people's lives. That's just one example. So it's not going to necessarily replace people's jobs. It's going to enhance almost everything we do now. And I think that's one thing that, as we talk about what's the workforce of the 21st century and what do companies need to be investing in, they need to really think about how is this going to not only just, you know, change their business, but how can they enhance their workers' capabilities, efficiency, everything with artificial intelligence.
Let's. I want to take advantage of what you're seeing in the marketplace and even inside the labs of Intel. Let's agree for a moment that everything you say is true and that we'll have wonderful advances. What do you say when you have an argument with someone like an Elon Musk who says, well, that's all well and good except for these pernicious effects? Do you just not believe them, or how do you answer it from an engineering even perspective?
Sure. I think what has to happen is you have to make you have to be conscious of where you're going to let something like artificial intelligence make decisions. And I think to some extent Elon's trying to warn us that we can't just let go of all decision making to artificial intelligence. So, you know, artificial intelligence could eventually make you know, life and death decisions around should care be given to somebody based on their current conditions. Should we ever give that control up to artificial intelligence? Or is it always going to be there to help to a doctor make those decisions? I think that's what he's telling us, is that we need to be careful about when do we hand over decision making. If you're going to have a robot or a bomb, a drone, should it be the decider of whether it drops a bomb and whether it's going to shoot somebody, or should there always be a human interacting with that decision so we have that control? I think that's the question he's fundamentally asking. That's all within our control, and it's not something scary. We'll make those decisions and decide when to do that. I think that's the discussion Elon and I have had in the debates.
Well, I'm reassured, hearing you say that, more reassured than about some of the scary things that you were talking about, Bernard. I want your perspective on this. You started the conversation by saying you're in the care business, which is a human touch, and yet technology is also important to your business. Talk about that, please.
You know, and I may be wrong about what I'm about to say, but I'll probably be gone by then.
I hope not.
Is this about the 22nd century corporation?
Yeah, exactly. But you know, it's from a takeaway. When I used to run around the company, I love technology. We invest a lot in technology. There's no question if I was rebuilding the company today and rebuilding healthcare, I would start with technology and build the healthcare system. Whereas healthcare was built in the United States, at least, with the concept of a hospital, and then everything was added to it, right? Well, now with the distribution of technology, you could do all kinds of wonderful things. But a couple of key takeaways. When I was talking about technology, what our employees were hearing was, "You're taking my job away." That you are going to let technology now become, you know, the centerpiece of what we mission-driven people have signed up for in life.
Yes.
To do good with people.
Yeah.
I don't see a scenario where technology would replace the human touch. I'll never forget my own personal experience of waiting to go to surgery I was very ill. I got something that happened to me. And I had a bunch of people coming to the room. Most of them meant well. And so when they left the room and they left me alone, this is a true story. I tell it all the time in my company. They left me alone. There was a nurse in the room with me. She came over to me. She looked at me. She saw something that nobody else saw. She saw fear. She put her hand on top of my hand. She lifted it and she walked away. Didn't say a word. I carry that image with me every day, right? You don't write a procedure for that, right?
No.
So I will never want to interfere with that relationship called trust between the nurse, the doctor, and the patient. So I'm clear in my organization, technology is an augmenting strategy to the human touch because I'm in a human touch business. Now, do I have to do everything with every individual? No. I can do some of that through technology, but even that is put together and framed from the human perspective. And so I hold that view, and I may, in my afterlife, look down at Kaiser Permanente and maybe robots are doing everything, but not on my watch.
I think that's worth a round of applause. We have a little time left, and I'm going to ask Bernard to share his thoughts on the political process because he's engaged with it. But first, what questions would all of you like to ask of either Brian or Bernard? So you're that keen on. Okay, please. So if we could just wait for the microphone, stand up and tell us your name, please.
Thank you very much. Michael Johnson from Australia, from Kokoda Capital. Very inspirational. Question to you both, gentlemen. What are the 2 or 3 things that keep you awake at night running your businesses?
Running your businesses. So thank you for that.
Yeah, the Affordable Care Act, the government,
Brian, you go first.
No, I'm not going first. He said he's done.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're right.
I think I worry the most about somebody inventing something that, just outpaces us. I mean, we wake up every day trying to think about almost every segment that we're in, and are we out inventing the competition? And it only takes one smart group of people in some lab to outpace you, and you'll find yourself in a distant following, And so I've never seen, and if I came back next year, I'd say the same thing. I've never seen technology move as fast as it is right now. It's unbelievable, the pace of innovation, and that keeps me awake every night. I think just working in the geopolitical environment today, whether it's domestically or internationally, almost everywhere you turn, it's in some array of chaos right now.
To your first point, given the speed of the speed of change, as a CEO leading an organization, have you had to change your methods of competitive intelligence? Do you do things now to keep abreast of things that you might not have done 10, 15 years ago, or that your predecessors might not have done?
Well, yes. One, I think I spend a lot more time thinking about, future technologies than I think my predecessors did. And I mean things that are 10 years out, because most of these developments take 10 years, 15 years.
So they could be focused on the roadmap as it's been defined. You're trying to get ahead of that.
Yeah, things like quantum computing, right? When that comes, that's going to shift the world again. But that's a good 10 years out. But I'm spending time now really thinking about that, and just how we gain intelligence. We have whole parts of the organization now that are solely focused on understanding and really moving us in the right direction for that long-term view.
Great. Bernard, you were in Washington yesterday talking about the latest attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. You're going to be back in Washington later in the week meeting with legislators. Tell us what's going on and what your crystal ball for the future on this is. Tell
us what's going on.
Yeah, well, I think it ties into the thoughtful question about what keeps me up at night. And I guess maybe for all of us in this room, because I think healthcare is just one of the case studies. I do think we all need to step back, and not saying that we don't, and reflect even more on what I would call, what is the narrative that people are acting in right now and acting to? Because there's no question there's a sea change that is in motion, and it gets played out, for example, in healthcare. And I have a couple of takeaways from being totally involved in the healthcare situation that goes all the way back to the Obama administration. And that is, if we're trying to make mega change in our society, and I would call anything tampering with healthcare like this is one of those mega societal issues, it should never be done on a partisan basis, period. And because the fact of the matter is, the construction of the Affordable Care Act is actually a fairly well put together piece of legislation that requires modification. And one of the things that I was talking to the Republican and Democrat senators about on last week was, if you step back and look at our country, the last big piece of legislation that we put in place to deal with health care was in 1965, when we agreed as a country that we're going to take care of the sick, the elderly and the poor. And then the next one that came along was in 2010, when we said we're going to redefine how do we think about the poor, which, by the way, as we go forward, we need to redefine how we think about the elderly, because when Medicare was put together, people were living about 65 to 67 years. Yep. Now in 2017, people are living to 85, 83, 81. The economics have changed dramatically now for the elderly of our great country. So I'm a strong believer, and we were working to this way, to this end until last week. We were on a path towards a bipartisan consensus on a vital few things that the government can do to stabilize the Affordable Care Act. And
excuse me, you're saying after the failure of the last piece of legislation. Okay.
After the failure of the last piece of legislation, what is now being handled through Senators Murphy and Senator Alexander, through the bipartisan committee, one of the committees, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, is to look at, can they reach a consensus on a vital few things to stabilize the Affordable Care Act. My company put together 6 proposals for them. Other groups like the governors, I would say of my 6, 4 are overlapping from the governors group. About 4 or 5 are overlapping from the insurance oversight regulatory body. There was a growing consensus in that group that there are 2 to 3 things that they can do that will stabilize this Affordable Care Act law going forward. And then came the latest wrinkle on last week, which is the Graham-Cassidy bill. It looks like it's going down. I don't know, but it looks like it's going down. And if it does, sooner is better than later, because the clock is ticking. And it's my hope that we reach a bipartisan conclusion.
Well, then perhaps we have an opportunity to end on a high note, which is that assuming that everything I've read suggests that that legislation will fail, and so your opinion then is that that will enhance the opportunities for this bipartisan legislation that you're talking about.
It would enhance that opportunity. The Affordable Care Act now have 20 million more Americans who have access to the front door of the American healthcare system, and we have 30 million more who are still locked out. Any piece of legislation that I'm going to support moves us in that direction.
Gentlemen, thank you for a stimulating conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.